Tonight on Nova. The Soviet Union, a world power and traditionally a leader in scientific theory. It has more scientists than any other nation on Earth. But in technology, the Soviet Union finds itself lagging behind, a trend that could undermine its very future as a world leader. Join MIT professor Lauren Graham as he asks, how good is Soviet science?
Major funding for Nova is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. Additional funding was provided by the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying healthcare products worldwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials.
I first came to the Soviet Union in 1960. I was a student then, just beginning a career in the study of Soviet science. Every couple of years I've returned. This would be my 15th trip. It would be my first encounter with the Soviet Union of Mikhail Gorbachev. I'm Lauren Graham, professor of Soviet Studies at MIT. This visit I've returned to ask the question, just how good is Soviet science in this age of high technology? I am always struck by the contradictions here. In spite of great military power, full employment, free health care and education, the Soviet Union in many ways resembles a backward, underdeveloped nation. There are chronic food shortages. Soviet consumers spend hours waiting in lines. Manufactured goods are of poor quality. Gorbachev has called many Soviet industrial goods hopelessly obsolete. It's a nation where the most modern automated cafeteria resembles an American automat of nearly 25 years ago. And when it comes to high technology, the Soviets appear even further behind. I went to the best electronics store in Moscow in search of that preeminent symbol of high-tech, the personal computer.
Я слышал, но я не уверен об этом, что вы можете здесь купить бытовой компьютер. Это можно?
Не знаю. Не знаю.
Не знаете?
Не знаю.
Индивидуальные компьютеры, домашние компьютеры.
Меня вообще-то они не интересуют компьютеры.
Да? Ну почему? Это самый модный.
Мне он не нужен.
Да. У нас в городе есть 2 штуки. Но понимаете, еще очень трудно людям понять целесообразность.
Почему?
Ну, каждый считает, зачем он нужен. Все люди
Зачем?
Понимают, да, ну, поймите, у вас есть другая система. Вы привыкли все переводить в быстроту. У нас система другая немножко в Союзе. У нас все по плану идет, понимаете?
Why should Soviet technology lag behind? It's a paradox. Moscow has some of the world's most distinguished scientific research institutes. The Steklov Institute of Mathematics, the Lebedev Institute of Physics, the Institute of Space Research, the Institute of Physical Problems. Inside these buildings is a scientific research establishment larger than that of any other nation on Earth. 1/4 of the world's scientists and half the world's engineers work here. But for all the talent and money committed, the results are disappointing. a problem that top scientists like Nobel Prize laureate Alexander Prokhorov now openly admit.
That on the right hand, we use here.
К сожалению, не все ученые, которые у нас считают...
To our regret, not all scientists here can meet the required standards. Just what percent are good and what percent are bad, it's hard to say. But the fact is we have to admit that we have quite a number of bad scientists.
Одним словом, товарищи, ускорение социально-экономического развития страны – ключ ко всем нашим проблемам, ближайшим и перспективным.
2 years ago, Mikhail Gorbachev launched a major reorganization of the Soviet economy. His goal was nothing less than to transform the Soviet Union into a modern, technologically advanced nation.
Выход мы видим в глубокой реконструкции народного хозяйства на базе новейших достижений науки и техники, прорывов на авангардных направлениях.
For Gorbachev, it's a question of power. In this era of microchips, Japanese robots, and Star Wars defenses, Gorbachev recognizes that the USSR cannot maintain superpower status while continuing to slip technologically. Leading Soviet science administrators like Georgy Skrabin agree there is no greater crisis for their country.
The basic factor, a very important factor in our development, is society's scientific technological progress. This is why we're speaking today about our technology, about our science.
Today's sense of alarm needs to be understood in the context of history.
The history of Russian science begins almost 250 years ago.
Over the years, the Soviet Union has made many contributions in science and technology. Soviet films tell us the story.
Russian science is proud of such mathematicians as Pafnuty Chebyshev and Nikolai Lobachevsky.
Dmitry Mendeleev is famous for his formulation of the periodic law of chemical elements. He thereby discovered one of the fundamental laws of science. Pavlov's teachings on higher nervous activity are one of the greatest achievements of modern natural sciences.
Then came the revolution, and science was crucial to Soviet plans. The early leaders, Lenin and Stalin, wanted to industrialize a vast and undeveloped nation. With their centralized government, they were able to mobilize resources rapidly for large projects. Soviet scientists and engineers led this push to industrialize. They built the world's first atomic power plant. They helped pioneer the development of the laser. In 1957, the world suddenly awoke to Soviet technological power when the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, was launched into orbit. At that time, it appeared the Soviets were leaving the West behind. Americans especially were shocked. Fearing the communists were ahead, school boards revised curricula to include more math and science. The USA went rocket crazy. Every home hobbyist, it seemed, had a rocket to launch.
Why did you build this model satellite?
Well, I built this model Sputnik because I've been hearing so much about it in the papers and hearing about the missile vanguard that I thought I'd build a Sputnik and take it to school, show it to my classmates.
How long did it take you to make it?
About a week and a half, but I can't understand why it took the Russians so long to build their Sputnik.
The first strides into the unknown.
In 1961, the Soviets continued their string of successes by putting the first man in space. I attended the celebration of Yuri Gagarin's return to Red Square, and I'll never forget the feeling of optimism and triumph. All curves were upward. Then, about 10 years ago, that feeling began to change. they began to notice that in certain crucial areas, for example, genetic engineering and computers, that not only were the curves no longer upward, they weren't even level anymore, that they were actually slipping. During the last years of Brezhnev, that situation, although they talked a little bit about it, remained stagnant. What's new now is we've got a leader, Gorbachev, more vigorous perhaps than any leader since Lenin, who says this straight out to his people, that we are backward, we have to change. To turn things around, Gorbachev is banking on the scientists who work here at the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. These are the Soviets who built the bombs and launched the Sputniks. The best of them are the most capable professionals in the country. They are accorded great respect, prestige, job security, and good salaries. They have privileges like those of a top American executive.
Академик Скрабан, я очень хотел бы говорить с вами о развитии советской науки, техники и так далее. Но как мы можем это делать? Я знаю, что вы очень заняты.
Да нет, дело не...
It's an establishment that's hard to penetrate. I've known the Academy's chief scientific secretary, Georgy Skrabin, for over 10 years. Yet even with acquaintances like this, in preparing this report, I was often denied access to people and places I thought were important to the story. Not surprisingly, military labs were totally off limits. As I have learned over 30 years of trying, understanding Soviet science is an art fraught with limitations. Traditionally, science has been a prized and almost sacred field of study in the Soviet Union. The education is strict and rigorous.
Ошибка, Таня хорошо, ошибка Дима и ошибка у Гриши. Так, следующее. Так, Ренат хорошо, Женя хорошо. Третий раз ошибка. Ребята, очень много ошибок.
From the earliest grades, Soviet students spend 1/3 of their school time on math and science studies, 6 days a week. There is a heavy emphasis on rote learning.
40. Какое же число надо увеличить?
Увеличить число 8.
Так, хорошо. Второе задание посмотрели.
This is a pen. It's
English, recognized as the international language of science, is the most commonly taught foreign language.
This is an exercise book.
Begin.
I see red, I see blue, I see you and you and you.
By the time students graduate from secondary school, they've had a lot of science. On average, 4 years more of physics, 3 years more of chemistry, 3 years more of biology, and at least 1 more year of calculus than the average American high school graduate. Almost half of all Soviet students choose careers in science. The best tend to go into the most theoretical areas.
Take theoretical science. What do you actually need to work with? Just a piece of paper and a pencil. It is not surprising that the state is willing to supply you with these necessities.
Science which depends on just imagination, blackboard, and chalk is generally the best Soviet science. At mathematics centers like the Steklov Institute in Moscow, the country's best minds think freely in the abstract. They are not dependent upon sophisticated scientific equipment and are remote from the ideological pressures of more earthbound sciences. Fundamental research in physics is another area of great Soviet strength. As in all nations, good theoretical work provides a foundation for successful application. But in the Soviet Union, theory often remains just theory. This reflects a romantic view of science that many influential Soviet scientists hold. Physicist Andrei Borovik-Romanov.
На самом деле наука необходима для духовного общения. И прежде всего ученые, обычно большинство ученых, работает потому, что это есть его духовная потребность занятия наукой. Поэтому не надо, говоря о полезности науки, ограничивать ее только примитивным пониманием, что она создает какие-то материальные вещи.
I think if you're discussing the problem of social and economic development of the country, you have to pay great attention to the science.
Biologist Yuri Ovchinnikov is another kind of Soviet scientist, the kind Gorbachev wants. He believes in practical results. Ovchinnikov is a vice president of the academy charged with overcoming Soviet backwardness in biology.
Is absolutely necessary for such a great country like Soviet Union to be on the level in technological research, in all scientific and technological standards, and to compete successfully with the great countries of the West, United States, Japan. We would like to be on the same level, on the same level.
In the Soviet scientific community, we're seeing a struggle, or at least a tension, between two types of scientists. The one type you could call the older type, wonderful people in many ways who revere fundamental science, who speak of the spiritual meaning of science without very much reference to practical utility. Another breed of scientists, of whom I would say Ovchinnikov is a good representative, who say, look, this is the modern world. Science isn't just an entertainment at the expense of the government. Science is one of the elements of influence and power. We must use science to improve not only the living standard in the Soviet Union, but the overall power of the Soviet Union.
It was for a long time that this academy was responsible for basic research, but not directly involved in all type of practical undertaking in Soviet Union. Now we're trying to change this. We're trying to put academic institutes in the leading positions in different branches of industry, agriculture, medicine, but only by such close collaboration between scientific institutes, particularly institutes of the academy and industry, we can solve the problems which are quite serious and quite impressive.
This lab is occupied with questions of top importance. It's no longer pure science. It's science which helps people. And I may be wrong, but to my mind, that's the supreme goal of any sort of human activity.
Fyodor Urnov is a Soviet student selected for an apprenticeship at Ovchinnikov's institute. Only 17 years old, Urnov does not remember when the study of modern genetics was considered a crime. In the 40s, a scientist named T.D. Lysenko decided that genetic theory was anti-communist because, he argued, it diminished the role of the environment. Lysenko's ideas caught Stalin's attention. Incredibly, scores of scientists were arrested and the study of modern genetics was banned. The consequences for Soviet medicine and agriculture were severe.
It's true that we had difficulties in development of our biology after the Second World War. Some political interference, misconceptions in biology prevented the development of modern molecular biology, bioorganic chemistry, physico-chemical biology in most of the academic institutes.
Joseph Stalin is dead. Scenes like these reported from
After Stalin's death, Soviet biologists battled to overcome Lysenko's influence. In the 1960s, the government began construction of a huge biology research complex near the town of Pushino, about 100 miles from Moscow. Today, there are thousands of biologists working here in about a dozen institutes. I was shown work in the genetic engineering of plants. The work would be considered rudimentary by Western biologists. Nonetheless, it shows that the Soviet Union is recovering from the damage caused by Lysenko.
I think that the problem of falling behind in our biology is a temporary problem. In a certain period of time, we should reach modern frontiers and achieve world standards in the development of this science. An example of that would be some of our achievements in the genetic engineering of various living things.
I was also introduced to one geneticist who assured me that his work was on a par with world standards. But only a handful of Soviet biologists are doing work of such quality. Finally, I toured a prototype factory where microorganisms are being cultured to produce high-protein grain substitutes. The hope here is to free the Soviet Union from its reliance on grain imports. The work I saw at Prushino is beginning to get Soviet biology back on track, but the laboratories here suffer from a problem that plagues nearly all research facilities in the USSR. There is a serious shortage of quality equipment. Even the simplest pieces of glassware or disposable paper and plastic products are hard to come by. Chemicals or sophisticated electronic equipment are more scarce. What is available is liable to be out of date, and ordering new equipment is a bureaucratic nightmare. It's difficult for an American scientist to understand how serious the supply problem is here. Generally, if a Soviet lab has good equipment, it's imported. The best equipped facility I saw on this trip was the Shemyakin Institute, headed by Ovchinnikov. In contrast to other Soviet institutes, it's modern, light, and attractive. It clearly represents the latest attempt to catch up in biology. They now realize that being good in mathematics on the blackboard, on the back of an envelope, is not enough. You have to take science into practice, into technology, and the whole goal of the Shemyakin Institute, with all of its wonderful equipment, is to take a field in which they have frankly been quite backward, modernize it, and use it to produce pharmaceuticals, medicines, organic substances of all kinds, new plants, new strains of animals, things that will help their economy. Just as important as biotechnology is computer science. This is a school for young programmers in Moscow. At present, all 9th and 10th grade students are required to study computer science, whether their schools have computers or not. In order to support this massive effort, the government had hoped to put 1 million microcomputers in the schools by the end of this decade. Unfortunately, Soviet industry has not been able to manufacture even 1/10 of the equipment needed. The government has had to cut the plan in half. These students are working on Yamaha computers imported from Japan to supplement the short supply.
Что ты пишешь-то?
Чтобы не уметь программировать сейчас. Это типичная школа или нет? Это? Нет, это не типично.
Сколько школ, как это?
Как это? Ну, примерно, по-моему, школ 7.
7?
Да.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2.
Let me tell you how it will be.
The software necessary to run computers has also presented headaches for Soviet planners. In the West, some of the most innovative software has been designed by entrepreneurs and hackers, people with access to computers and time to play with new ideas. In one classroom, I did find some students who were being allowed to hack, copying Western video games and listening to Western rock and roll. Unfortunately, the Soviet computers these students had to work on were industrial models far too expensive for widespread schoolroom use.
Why didn't it come down then? $5.
It's an old Soviet problem, the failure of central planners to produce the right equipment at the right time.
Missed it. I'm no good. There. Well, you mean you gotta get 100 of those? I'll never do that. Not in 100 years.
There are some people who would say that there's a basic contradiction between a centralized economy and an innovative one. In the Soviet Union, traditionally, the only way a new item gets produced is when somebody at the top says, produce that item. They got by that way for many years. Now there are so many new items that need to be produced that it's impossible to be able to think ahead and to know in a central planning office everything that needs to be done. So they play a constant game of catch-up. They suddenly find out that personal computers are important. So someone at the top says, produce personal computers. By the time they get those personal computers, if they do get them, something else will be important. They're always 5 to 10 years behind. Computer science has suffered for the same reasons as genetics. Stalin considered it bourgeois. The party didn't reverse its line until 1958. In the early 60s, the Soviets did assemble a decent mainframe computer, the BESM-6, but they've always relied more on imitation than innovation. One of the latest Soviet mainframes, the ES-1061, is patterned on an IBM computer. By Western standards, it's already outdated. The government is trying to encourage more innovation in the computer industry. Andrei Bears is developing a computerized text editing system for the Soviet newspaper Pravda and other publications. In the West, word processing systems are already in widespread use. But in the Soviet Union, professional writing and editing is still done on typewriters. One of Gorbachev's highest priorities is putting computers to work in industry. I toured a research institute of the machine tool industry in Moscow. Here I saw engineers attempting to create systems for computer-aided design and manufacture. Computerized controls allow machine tools to be reprogrammed quickly to produce different items and to adapt to changing market demands. Flexible manufacturing systems have revolutionized production in other countries. By 1990, Gorbachev hopes to quadruple production of computer-controlled machine tools and double the production of robots.
И кажется, что вы очень хотите улучшить технику. Я заметил, что, например, вот эти роботы очень интересные, но японский. Потом это робот, это советский, правильно или нет?
Значит, тот робот советский, ну вот я могу сказать, что вот эти вот роботы, которые, значит, Фанук мы поставили, да. Значит, практически аналогичные роботы выпускает наш сосед, завод «Красный пролетарий».
Ага, понятно. Надо об этом говорить,
вот, поэтому, значит, если не надо, значит не надо. Вот.
At this experimental plant, the engineers had imported a Japanese robot in order to study and duplicate its design. The process is called reverse engineering. The plant manager refused to say very much, but I could see that his engineers were sensitive about the process. The problem is a familiar one for Soviet technology. By the time these engineers successfully copy these robots, an improved design will probably be going into production in another country. According to the Japanese manufacturer, the Soviets have not been able to copy even this very simple robot because of the accuracy of its motor.
Но у меня есть другой вопрос, если вы не возражаете. Я заметил там вывеска, плакат, и там написано «Делать честь советских ученых занят ведущее место в мире по всем основным направлениям». Вы согласны с этим или нет?
Где это?
Вот там, на стене.
After only a few questions, the plant manager refused to talk to me. Without an explanation, I was told that we had seen enough, and we were asked to leave. We had previously arranged a meeting with the director of the plant, but that meeting too, I soon found out, was canceled.
Но можно говорить об этом, значит, определенный час. Можно это сделать.
Нет, ну как без него мы должны? Надо с ним, как я могу решить? Я не могу.
А вы знаете, что
Он знал, что мы будем здесь. Это было уже сделано. Мы договорились об этом. Елена, она позвонила.
Вы знаете, бывают срочные звонки, тут же звонит министр, замминистра и вызывает. Он даже и без обеда, вы знаете, ну как и у вас, наверное, тоже ведь бывает, когда вызывают к начальству. Поэтому он, генеральный директор, не своеволен своему времени.
We've had a very frustrating experience here. This is the third time I've been here. We find out from the newspapers and from the television and the radio that all sorts of interesting things are going on about trying to get reforms to accelerate production, develop computer-controlled machinery. Whenever we come to a place, particularly in industry, and try to see that in action, we just run into one obstacle after another. And we've just met one large obstacle this morning.
По какому праву вы фотографируете здесь, товарищ?
Но у нас есть разрешение, даже у нас...
Я вас спрашиваю, по какому праву? Дайте мне разрешение, чтобы вы имели право здесь фотографировать.
Но у нас есть советский гид, вы можете говорить с ней.
Почему вы фотографируете? Я запрещаю вам это делать здесь. Сейчас я сообщу в милицию.
Но...
Что но? Кто давал право вам фотографировать?
I don't see why we cannot photograph here. When we asked our Soviet guide why we weren't being allowed to film, she asked us not to film her.
We have general permission to photograph on the streets of Moscow. This is a regular public street.
After a few weeks of appeals, we were invited to visit another plant. The Zeal Truck Factory is one of the oldest automotive plants in the Soviet Union. Today, it serves as a development center for new production technology. The manager showed us how lasers were being used to shape engine parts. He also showed us an automated line for the assembly of gas tanks. Most of the plant, however, was using machinery that was 5 to 10 years behind similar machinery in Western factories. The main assembly line still relied heavily on manual labor. The automatically assembled gas tanks were piling up. The manager, borrowing the rhetoric of Gorbachev, assured us that he was accelerating modernization.
The time when it was possible to turn out low-quality product has now ended. There's no alternative but to develop high-quality production. The issue is quite clear. We have to produce products of appropriate quality. There was a trend to overemphasize the extensive development of the economy. That is, to develop productive capacities not by perfecting the product quality and intensifying productivity, but merely by inflating the volume of production. It was outlined in the documents of the 27th Party Congress. The reconstruction of a plant such as ours should be organized in a manner flexible enough to create new working conditions without serious new capital investments. To create a situation which will allow automation and mechanization, the latest achievements of science and technology.
Akadem Gorodok, Academic City. A planned community of scientists located about 2,000 miles from Moscow in Siberia. Built in the late 50s, its purpose was to help modernize this region. There are 60 institutes here employing 40,000 scientists. Remote, with long, cold winters, the Academy strives to make life here attractive. This visit of the Regional State Symphony is just one of many cultural programs provided. Schools are also above average, and wages are higher than in Moscow. Originally, the hope was to break down the barriers between pure research and applied science. The experiment has been only a partial success. The Fox Farm of the Institute of Cytology and Genetics is one of the successes. Here, researchers have bred fox, as well as mink, to increase the softness of their furs. The work directly benefits the Soviet fur trading industry, which is the world's largest.
All of it. Yeah, every bit of it. Well, that's a friendly fox. It's a really nice fox. I like this one.
The Fox Farm, however, is an exception. The Institute of Automation and Electrometry is more typical. Here I was shown work in optical memory, storage of documents on holographic slides. Each slide can hold approximately 3,000 pages of information. Similar systems have found widespread application in the West, but here the system has not been put to practical use. The fact is that most of the brightest scientists in Academic City avoid the bureaucratic problems associated with working with industry. Researcher Andrei Korenkevich typifies the attitude of many Academic City scientists.
You see, I belong to different forces. The army of researchers whose prime concern is to do their professional job. That is, this job has no immediate relationship with industry.
Korenkevich's own work is significant. He has found a way to use lasers to make lightweight lenses for optical instruments. The process is inexpensive and its value is recognized internationally. Still, Soviet industry has no plans to exploit Korenkevich's work.
As we see it, the technology is simple. It has been carefully worked out by our highly educated people. Industry, however, with its present cadres, is not prepared to take it on.
The problem is that a good idea has trouble getting out of a Soviet lab. Soviet factories are too busy meeting their monthly quotas to do the necessary retooling. Or in other cases, the bureaucratic approvals required are too involved. I toured a local pipe factory. There I spoke with a scientist from Academic City about such problems. He had helped design a laser system that measures and cuts pipe lengths.
Откуда эта идея?
Идея вот откуда. Наше начальство в нашей области, в Новосибирской, значит, примерно 4 года назад они попросили Сибирское отделение Академии наук помочь новосибирской промышленности, сделать технический прогресс. Но мы понимали, что мы сделаем такое же устройство, и оно будет работать здесь. И через 2 года мы это сделали.
Согласны ли вы, что обычно советская промышленность принимает такие инновации медленно?
Ну, конечно, медленно принимает, потому что это тоже первый шаг. Ведь вы понимаете, только для завода нужно их много, этих приборов. Мы-то сделали один. Ведь сейчас уже другое министерство должно их делать много. Да. На все заводы.
I also spoke with 2 of the plant's managers. They were very sensitive about discussing what party leaders openly call the backwardness of Soviet industry. It seemed Gorbachev's policy of glasnost or openness had not yet filtered this far east of Moscow.
Но здесь очень серьезный вопрос. Ясно, не только что вы отстали, но, может быть, вы отставаете больше и больше. Нам кажется это. И если это правильно, что вы можете делать?
Ну, вопрос-то неправильно ставится вами.
кто сказал, что мы отсталые? Это
Вот
ваш
Лигачев,
вывод. Это
ваш
ваш
лидер.
что мы отсталые. Ничего подобного.
Лигачев, Горбачев, другие.
Это в ряде направлений, к которым мы стремимся. А так, неправильная постановка.
Наши предприятия не заинтересованы.
Our industrial enterprises are not interested in implementing new technology, new articles, scientific or modern technology.
Они не заинтересованы в этом, потому что они будут...
They're not interested in it because they have all the financial benefits working in the old way.
Но зато у них не будет болеть голова.
It would be a headache to make something new.
Что-то новое, это всегда трудно. Они так...
Soviet students were much more critical in their analysis of Soviet industry. I visited 3 schools: Novosibirsk University in Siberia, Moscow State University, and the Moscow School of Power Engineering.
Why is the problem of introducing new ideas to our industry so difficult? Well, as it was already mentioned here, we have a large number of different directorates. In order for an idea to be utilized by manufacturers, it has to go through too many approvals. Proposals may lie for months on some bureaucrat's desk. So, by the time it comes to mass production, an idea, in fact, is outdated.
As it seems to me, a certain role is played by the freedom of enterprise that you have in the West. I mean, yes, free enterprise, a competition of a kind between entrepreneurs. For example, in Japan, people are somehow oriented towards this run after incentives. One can give a lot of examples where ventures are deployed there very fast. That is, the market demands are immediately satisfied. We have a different system, centralized and pre-planned. And this centralized planning disturbs us sometimes.
The fact is that during recent years, even small lags in science and technology became much more noticeable. Now, technological development is fast, and small lags become much more apparent than they did, for instance, 20 years ago. And so why is it talked about? I talk about it, for instance, because I'm a patriot, and I think that we're not more stupid than other peoples, and that we can do the same things. Why should we lag behind everyone? We're not drinking our borscht from bark shoes anymore. Are we really that stupid? Of course, we feel challenged when we hear that at your university, for example, you're developing artificial intelligence for computers. Why can't we do the same? We can. It just takes work. We must bear down, and we'll do it.
There is one other obstacle to scientific and technological progress that the students downplayed. I think, however, that it is serious. It's the issue of access to information. This is the Lenin Library. It is one of the largest collections of books in the world. In recent years, government censors have permitted more foreign books and periodicals to circulate. But even still, censorship is common in Soviet society. International scientific and technical journals often take months to pass inspection. Photocopying is also restricted. Only one machine was available for limited copying, and we were not allowed to film it. As a result, Soviet scientists are among the most isolated researchers in the world. They are often unaware of breakthroughs in their fields until months or years after the fact. Few are allowed to travel to international conferences, and a tendency toward secrecy often limits sharing research even among Soviet colleagues. To illustrate the nature of government censorship, I went to another library at the Moscow Power Engineering Institute. I took their issues of Science magazine from the shelf. I had brought with me photocopies of selected articles from the American edition. I found that articles about the politics of science were excised from the Soviet version. Even seemingly innocuous material was often suppressed.
Well, here is an article in Science for 6 December 1985, and this is their translation of 6 December 1985. And here is, under News and Comment, Summit ends with exchange agreements. But I can't find that article here. Можно спросить у вас что-нибудь? Вот это наш журнал Science, 6 December 1985. Это то же самое, как здесь. Но я вижу здесь, что есть статья, что будут новые научные обмены между нашими странами. Но я не могу найти эту...
Здесь нет?
Нет.
Но это уже не к нам вопрос. Мы не сможем вам ответить на этот вопрос. Потому что это дело с издательством связано, но не с нами же.
Хорошо. Может быть, вы поняли, что я сказал. Но почему те статьи, которые относятся к Советскому Союзу, даже к обмену, не здесь публикованы?
Вы уверены, что это
да,
советское издание?
Могу...
Нет, что это советское издание?
Да, я уверен. Ну, это там написано, там.
Но я думаю, что это журнал, который издается в Соединенных Штатах Америки.
Вы думаете, ли вы...
Я это думаю. Я выражаюсь.
Хорошо.
Government control extends beyond censorship of information. Ultimately, the state requires strict loyalty from scientists themselves. All Soviet scientists and scholars know that their jobs and privileges can be taken away if the state wishes.
I was arrested in November 13 of 1980 and was accused in slandering of Soviet social and political system.
For 15 years, Viktor Brailovsky and his wife Irina were two of approximately 15,000 Soviet Jews known as refuseniks. Like many refuseniks, they were once respected Soviet scientists. Until just recently, they were prisoners of a government that refused their request to emigrate abroad. We talked in their Moscow apartment.
In science, to be promoting in science, the most important demand is ideological. Ideological demand, and by the way, it is quite official. It is not only my opinion. It's quite official. The professional quality is of secondary meaning.
The government says many scientist refuseniks are not allowed out of the country because they know state secrets. In the Brailovsky's case, it was Irina who the government claimed held classified information.
We applied for exit visa in 1972. At that time, I was a senior researcher in Moscow Institute of Control Computer, and Irina was a senior researcher at Moscow State University in Computer Center. Immediately after application, Irina within the days and I within 2 months, we were dismissed from our job. And since then, we never were able to work according to our specialty in any Soviet institution. And the official pretext of this refusal was Irina's secrecy.
Back in 1978, Moscow State University investigated and concluded that Irina never held any state secrets. But it wasn't until August of 1987 that the Brailovskys were officially granted permission to emigrate.
It looks like somebody is sitting in his chair and decide this one will go to prison, this one will go to Israel, this one will be refusing for years. And nobody knows what is the ground for such a decision. Absolutely.
Parliament should seek reassurances that the law of the land.
Алик! Ну давай.
Traditionally here, science is considered as something that belongs to and governed by the state. and controlled by the state completely.
Alec Jaffa, a close personal friend, was once a prominent Soviet mathematician. After applying to emigrate, Jaffa was demoted to a low-level teaching position in a vocational school. He and his family have been waiting for permission for 11 years. Alec believes that his situation is a logical consequence of the state's ownership and control of science and scientists.
You know, I know a number of stories when scientists were explicitly reproached for their desire to leave by the fact that they got education here from the state, that it was paid by the state, and that they were allowed to work in science for a long time by the state, and so on. So that they must be thankful to the state for all that, and that's why they have no right to leave. This is a kind of conviction many people share. I'm working for more than 25 years. For more than 25 years, did not I pay my debts to the state or not? And what do you think?
For an official response on the Refusnik issue, I talked to Academy of Sciences spokesman Georgy Skrabin.
Всех отказников мы тоже с удовольствием, чтобы уехали.
All the refuseniks are welcome to go.
Они нам не нужны.
Who the hell needs them anyway?
Они просто знают секреты.
It's simply that they know secrets.
Уедут они все. Я думаю, придет время, когда вы будете не
Time will pass and they'll all leave. I think that the time will come when you won't know what to do with them all. Then you will regret it.
That's all. Американцы хотят, чтобы хорошие к вам.
You Americans want good people to come to America.
Я должен вам сказать.
But these are not good people. I have to tell you, and this is my personal opinion, that the person fleeing his motherland is not a good person.
Это не лучший человек.
Refusniks hope that more permissions will be granted soon, but only a small minority has been permitted to leave so far. While they wait, every other Saturday night, Refusnik mathematicians and physicists gather for a formal scientific seminar. Here, cut off from the official Soviet scientific community, they continue their pursuit of knowledge. This is how they stay alive scientifically. Western scientists visiting the Soviet Union are invited to attend and urged to bring with them Western journals or letters from colleagues.
Let's begin. 1 second. Seminar session will be in 2 weeks at the apartment of Reznikov. Yes. So I would be glad to give floor to the next reporter, and he will introduce himself. And
their guest this evening was a physicist from Sweden, Thomas Fried.
First of all, I want to say how happy I am to be here and to have the great honor to have the opportunity to speak to all of you. Okay, so now I will start my lecture.
It is worth noting that while we were preparing this report, one other person at this seminar was granted permission to leave. The remaining refusniks are watching Gorbachev closely.
Solid target, high degree of ionization. And this particular one.
Что мы понимаем под ускорением? Курс на ускорение не сводится к преобразованиям в экономической области. Он предусматривает проведение активной социальной политики, последовательное утверждение принципа социалистической справедливости.
How far Gorbachev will go in lifting controls over scientists and scientific information is not clear. His modernization program hinges in part on the principle that a loosening of controls will spark innovation and creativity.
Главное, что должно обеспечить нам успех, живое творчество масс.
At the same time, Gorbachev is betting that more freedoms will not create social unrest. As my trip came to an end, I was convinced that Gorbachev does want change, and he sees science and technology as the key. But the question remains, Can Soviet scientists and engineers do for Gorbachev what he wants? Certainly there is progress. In biotechnology, computers, and automation, the Soviets are improving. The problem, however, is that in America, Europe, and Japan, progress is even more rapid. International competition in technology is now far more intense than at any time in history. The Soviet economic system, sluggish bureaucracy, and controls over information place scientists and engineers here at a disadvantage. Can these impediments be overcome? The stakes are high. No nation can remain a leader indefinitely while lagging in technology. In today's world, technology is power.
For a transcript of this program, send $4 to Nova, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts 02134. Please be sure to include the show title. To purchase film or video copies of this program for educational use, call toll-free 1-800-621-2131. In Illinois or Alaska, call Collect 312-940-1260. Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. Additional funding was provided by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials. And by the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying healthcare products worldwide.